Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I'm Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, yes, we are still working on the video on ATF's new rule as what does it mean to be engaged in the business of selling firearms. But in the meantime, I want to talk to you about another really hot button issue, especially for the hometown crowd here in Washington and many of the other states where I got a lot of subscribers. And of course, I'm talking about high capacity magazine bans. You know, those pesky little laws that are completely unconstitutional, actually sold to voters that it's going to save lives, and yet we know it absolutely does nothing of the sort. Well, one of the arguments that those who support these laws commonly say is that they're not in common use and they're not really used for lawful purposes. We got a report from the National Shooting Sports Foundation that I think is going to put that argument to bed once and for all. In fact, it's not just going to put the argument to bed, it's going to put it in its grave, and we will never ever hear from it again. And this is going to force those that are actually proponents of high capacity magazines to come up with even more creative and more disingenuous arguments. Don't believe me? Let's spend a few minutes and we'll geek out on the data. So today, let's spend a few minutes and let's talk about how this should end the high capacity magazine ban debate forever. Okay, before we get going too far down the road we're going down, proud to announce that this video is being brought to you by Right to Bear. That's right, legal protection for self-protection. Listen, good lawyers aren't cheap, cheap lawyers aren't good. You're not truly prepared unless you have Right to Bear back you. You will always get an attorney-answered hotline, so you will always have a confidential phone call. There are no cap limits for either civil or criminal defense. This covers all forms of self-defense. So from a fist to a firearm, from a fat lip to a dead body, you are covered, and you will have some of the nation's most passionate 2A attorneys in your corner fighting for you. And right now, if you visit my friends at protectwithbear.com and you use the promo code WGL, you will receive 10% off. Listen, you need to protect yourself so that you can protect them. Visit my good friends at protectwithbear.com. Okay, while I was down in Las Vegas, I received an advance copy of this report from the Dudley Brown. That's right, president of the National Association for Gun Rights. He had received an advance copy of this report from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Now, for those of you who don't know what NSSF is, yes, they do get politically involved, but compared to some of the other organizations that we talk about on this channel, NSSF is really a trade organization that does a fantastic job of defending the rights of those that are in the firearms industry. Okay, they're a professional trade organization and they do a fantastic job of trying to defend the liberties of these companies so that they can remain in business. Now, because of that, I'm saying that because I want you to know that unlike some of the other organizations, which I think very highly of, and you know the ones I think highly of, there is always going to be a political or a litigation slant to what they do. And that's fine. We're lawyers. Just be honest about it. I put a slant to much of what I talk about here on this channel as well. However, when we're dealing with trade organizations, and yes, there is a financial interest in this, they're not engaged in the type of litigation that geeks like me and some of the other people we talk about on the channel are. So I want you to take this objective data, because here's the thing that the National Shooting Sports Foundation did, is they went through all the data to try to determine, hey, in the last few years, just how many of these dreaded high-capacity magazines have actually been sold to the American consumer. Now, just so you understand, this was the purpose of the report according to NSSF. Purpose: estimate the number of detachable firearm magazines segmented by capacity that have been sold and made available using the latest information, 2023 initial study period. Estimate the number of magazines provided in the box with firearms made available to consumers, along with secondary market direct consumer purchase of firearm magazines. This is done as part of NSSF's ongoing industry research to provide insights into the firearm and ammunition industry. Okay, so we are looking for two things here. Number one, how many high-capacity magazines came with firearms? Okay, and then number two, how many aftermarket or additional high-capacity magazines have been sold in the industry? Now, of course, I know some of you are going to roll your eye and go, well, whose data did they rely on? Well, they answered that as follows. Methodology: utilize the ATF's annual firearms manufacturers expert reports to identify firearm manufacturers and corresponding firearm manufacturing activity of pistols and rifles. The ATF AFMER reporting is segmented by pistol, revolver, rifle, and shotgun categories of manufacturing and export. Okay, so the data that NSSF is relying upon is, that's right, ATF's data. So, if anyone in the United States government or anybody for a state government who thinks that this data is all bunk, I just want you to know that this comes straight from the horse's mouth. So, what did the results of this study show? Well, as follows. Independent research and direct survey of firearm and magazine manufacturers yielded industry averages for pistol and rifle magazines that come in the box. Pistol magazines had an industry average of 2.1 magazines per firearm from the manufacturer, with 44% being 10 and below capacity. Okay, so what they're saying is on average, a firearm, when it's sold new, will come with 2.1 magazines, and about 40% of that time, the magazines will be less than 10 rounds, which then presumably means about 60% of the time it exceeds 10 rounds. What else did the results show? Rifle magazines had an industry average of 1.8 magazines per firearm from the manufacturer, with half being 10 and below capacity, 20% being 11 to 29 round capacity, and 30% being 30 plus round capacity. And then if you want to know, how do consumers get their magazines? Do they usually use the ones that just came with the firearm, or are they aftermarket, post-purchased magazines? The data shows us. Of the firearm magazines estimated in this study, 29% originate from detachable magazines provided in the box with each newly manufactured firearm, and 71% of detachable magazines were distributed to the consumer market as an aftermarket product. All right, now, we all know about the common use test, right? Because when we take a look at historical analogs that kind of delimit the outer edges of the Second Amendment, we find that the only types of bans that we have allowed as a society are those against weapons which are deemed both dangerous and unusual, okay? Now, many weapons obviously are dangerous, so it's the and unusual that we focus on. And of course, to be unusual, it would have to be kind of extraordinary, right? There would have to be something odd or rare about it. Now, we all know the answer to this, but do you really want to know what the numbers are? Are high-capacity magazines, if we're going to define that as any magazine that holds more than 10 rounds, are they in common use today for lawful purposes? Well, again, according to the data, an estimated 963 million magazines were produced and entered the commercial market between 1990 and 2021. That's right, almost a billion magazines. Now, how many of them actually held more than 10 rounds? Of the estimated 963 million magazines, approximately 74%, or 717 million magazines, have a capacity of 11 plus rounds. And that just accounts for magazines that went into circulation from 1990 moving forward. So we are clearly at a point where we have over 1 billion magazines in the United States that have a capacity that exceeds 10 rounds. What else did the data show? A majority of the 11 plus round capacity magazines are rifle magazines. About 45% of the magazines estimated in this study are rifle magazines with 30 plus round capacity. The percentage of detachable magazines at 11 plus capacity is about 55% of total pistol magazines. The handgun, the most common weapon used for self-defense, more than half the magazines produced since 1990 exceed more than 10 rounds. The amount of 10 and below capacity rifle magazines supplied from the manufacturer is over 1.5 times the amount of 30 plus capacity rifle magazines. The consumer market totals of rifle magazines show 30-plus capacity magazines over 413 million are over 30 times the amount available than 10 and below capacity rifle magazines, about 13 million. So if you're looking for rifle magazines for less than 10 rounds, you're going to have around 13 million or so to choose from. If you're looking for something that exceeds 10 rounds, well, good news, you got well over 400 million to select from. And let us remember that this continues a trend, especially in the semi-automatic handgun market, where we're seeing a predominant number of firearms, even those that are only 3¼ inch barrel, 3½ inch barrel, holding 12 and 15 rounds. And the likelihood that we're going to see technology continuing in that direction is very, very likely, meaning that the numbers here are not likely to regress, but actually continue in the same trend. Ultimately, NSSF comes to the conclusion that the findings in this report give some insight to the volume and capacity of detachable firearm magazines in the United States for the study period. A more comprehensive estimate would be attainable if participation from firearm and magazine manufacturers increased in future updates. Consumer preferences of 11-plus capacity magazines are reflected in the manufacturing activity of the firearm industry. Changes in legislation outlawing or granting access to these magazines may change overall market proportions, but the preference to have more ammunition available is clear. And so what this is going to leave the Rob Bontas and the Bob Fergusons and the Kwame Raouls of the world with is you're going to have to come up with more creative and disingenuous arguments. You know, that magazines don't constitute arms at all. Not true, but you could try that one. Or that the plaintiff needs to establish that they're in common use for self-defense, which they don't, or any other horse crap argument that you can come up with, because the bottom line is, and the numbers don't lie, this is ATF. And do we believe that ATF is over-reporting or likely under-reporting? Because as NSSF pointed out, not every firearm manufacturer and magazine manufacturer was even willing to participate in this study. Listen, we're going to go ahead and link it up down below so that you can geek out on the study for yourself. Kudos to the National Shooting Sports Foundation. You guys did tremendous work here. Appreciate all of the efforts. If you guys got any other questions about this or anything else related to what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you should know how to get a hold of Washington Gun Law by now. If you don't, that's okay. That information is down there in the description box. And then finally, let's everyone remember that part of being a lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay safe.